I spent 12 hours over 5 days watching every single video from the Knees Over Toes guy. His fans say he's cured them of chronic knee pain. His haters say he's peddling dangerous pseudoscience. But what do I think?
This is my brutally honest review.
You got one leg that can't plant well, 70% more chance of knee ligament tear.
That is a little suspiciously high. In general, muscle imbalances don't cause much effect on injury risk. So yeah, I don't think he has any references anywhere. There's a rule of thumb I use from Greg Lehman, which is basically biomechanics doesn't really matter until or unless the forces are extremely high. If he's talking about maximum effort vertical jumps, especially in like elite athletes, those forces could potentially be high enough where you could start to see this stuff. It'd be interesting to see, but he doesn't include anything about where the actual reference is. So
there was a pivotal point in 1978 that should have been for the better for our knees. Duke University found that when our knee goes over our toes, it puts more pressure on our knee. The muscles responsible for protecting your knees, they also strengthen your tendons, ligaments. Also from Duke last year, found that humans can regenerate cartilage the same way like zebrafish can.
I think we've seen this in a number of studies, that we can regenerate cartilage. I had a client that her doctor told her, your knees hurt because you've worn away all your cartilage. And so, like, whenever you do anything, it's just like rubbing bone on bone. That's wrong at so many levels. It's just so far from, like, proven and evidence-based and positive and supportive as well. Like, anatomically, it just doesn't happen either. It's not like the cartilage slides together, right? It's actually, like, separated by this interarticular fluid. And the cartilage only touches during, like, extremely high-force things. Anyway, he's right. Absolutely right.
Simply walking backwards. Look at that. You literally cannot walk backwards without your knee going over your toe. So if you want a long-term route of just having knee longevity, just walk backwards 15 minutes, 3 times a week. Within a 2-year span, you will have done about 100 miles. It's just physics and biology. Our human bodies were not designed to fail.
This is like good marketing, right? Of course it's not that simple. He knows it's not that simple. If you're in knee pain, right? If you just start walking backwards and keep going for 100 miles, you're going to start with knee pain and you're going to be crippled by the end of it. It's not like there's a fundamental amount of stimulus that once you hit that accumulated over any period of time, then like you win and like your knees are good, or your joints are good, or like you're strong, or you'll have a 42-inch vertical or whatever, right? It's about how you use that stimulus. So now I really like what he said about the 15 minutes 3 times a week. That sounds like a great little formula they've got there. I'm a big proponent of knees over toes. I've been for a long time. He's making a lot of excellent points, but let's not get it twisted. Your body doesn't just work by like accumulating stimulus. It responds by how challenging is this stimulus right now. When you give yourself that reasonable stimulus and you do it 3 times a week, your body is going to adapt to those. So the way I work with things, I try not to give like hard formal prescriptions like this, because for instance, there are people, probably a lot, where if you have them start with 15 minutes of walking backwards, it's going to be too much for them, right? People with knee pain already, right? Or just people that are really out of shape. So they start with that, it makes it worse, they get discouraged, and they stop. Or, potentially even worse, it makes it worse, but they listen to Ben, because he said, there are no outliers, you keep going. It makes it worse. Here's the thing, with lower or moderate frequency like this, 3 times a week, it gives you a bit of a buffer zone. I like to have people do rehab every day because it works faster, it's more effective. There's a lot of things you have to figure out. And so if you're only working on these problems 3 times a week, it's gonna take a lot longer. And actually, Charles Poliquin, he has a saying of like, anything you wanna do, frequency will get you there faster. So frequency is a really powerful tool. And with the 3 times a week, that's a bit of a buffer where for some people, they'll say they do the 15 minutes, they're walking backwards, it's a little worse, but 3 days a week means you have at least 1 rest day between every workout. So it makes it a little worse, you have a rest day, it recovers a little, and maybe by the next day before your training, it's a little better. And in this case, it'll work. But there will be the people where you do the 15 minutes, it's fairly worse. The next day, you maybe recover a little, your body is still, again, we're talking about like a physical recovery, but there's also like the sensitization and habituation and the whole pain science side of things. But then the day after, you go to do your next training and it's worse than the day you started, right? And so what do? Well, you do it again because there are no outliers. This is always better, right? You know, and you're just going to have this negative trend of just making things worse and worse until you inevitably stop because you realize this is not working. The way I do rehab, I focus entirely on this problem of what's going to make it better, what's going to make it worse. And so that's not the topic for this video, so I'm not going to really dive into that right now. But that's just the reason why I like to do things in a little bit more complex of a manner, because I want to make things work for everyone, like truly, right? Rather than like having a simple like kind of catchphrase here. But you know, again, overall, this is great. I like this. And again, I like the guy and he's doing good work. But I don't like these universal prescriptions.
That is the most regressed form, and we can add resistance to that if you want to speed up the results of walking backwards. So it just says the timer for 15 minutes. Never work through pain.
There we go. So now he says never work through his pain. This is super, super important. It doesn't catch everything because, you know, sometimes, quite often, you'll do something, there will be a central sensitization, and then something will hurt the next day. Right? So you still have to deal with and account for that. Also, as far as the walking backwards being the easiest regression, it's quite easy. It's good for a lot of people. But I think even easier for people that are having trouble with even walking. I like using knee extensions, potentially without any weight, sitting on a chair just like this, right? Just extending the knee. I'm just lifting the knee up here so you guys can see, but you know, you could have your knee relaxed as you're normally sitting and then just, you know, extend it this way. Or if that's too hard, you can work a little bit with just isometrics. Knee extension, knee flexion, sort of pushing laterally here and pushing laterally there. Working all of those isometrics. Isometrics generally are fairly easy on the tendons and ligaments there.
Of your body is that the stronger you are in reverse of a motion that causes pain, the more protected you are when you go into that motion. If it's too light, you just don't challenge yourself. There's nothing really wrong with that. The progress will just take longer and not be as great of progress.
It's also not just like that if it's too light, progress will be slower. Sometimes if it's really too light, you don't make any progress at all. Just a little bit why it's even more important to titrate your loading properly. I really like the word or the term knee ability here. This is really good. Positive stuff, and positive stuff has a good effect on pain. So this is really good. And again, why I like this guy so much more than a lot of the standard of care things. We know pain is biopsychosocial. We know what we think and what we feel at a conscious and unconscious level, what situations we're in has an effect on the pain we're gonna feel. And so a lot of the standard of care stuff, right? The client I told you guys about that her doctor told her that her knee cartilage is totally worn out and it's rubbing bone on bone. You can imagine, like, how is that going to affect her psychologically? Thinking that her patella is just like rubbing bone on bone. The joint is just rubbing and grinding together. That's not a positive thing. That is going to lead to more pain. That is going to have such a negative impact on your patients and clients and people you work with, you know, and just your friends, people you're around, right? So really nice to see like terms and words like knee ability here, right? Like what's going to have a better effect? You're talking about like your bones are grinding away at each other because you don't have any cartilage, or you're talking about knee ability and building knee ability.
Sand in a bag on grass works great. A car at neutral is my personal favorite. Even a hill can get the job done. And we're back. So now point number 3 is really a truth of life that's going to help you get the most out of this. And this is the guiding thing that took my life from destroyed by knees to now completely dominating my knees. No excuses ever for anything. Every time you make an excuse, you just put a lie into the universe. You just lied. Because you're much more powerful than that. I saved up $1,000 by the time I was 6 years old. I'll tell you now. So I said, don't get me any birthday presents. Don't get me any Christmas presents. So right off the bat, for everyone watching this, cut out birthday, cut out Christmas. You just got yourself saved a bunch of money right there. No toys. So I went about 2.5 years, no toys. And then I was pestering my parents for any little jobs I could do and telling every aunt and uncle who would listen, don't send me crap, send me cash. Okay? So now it's about 6.5. Christmas comes around. I had saved up.
This is great. It's fucking awesome. This is great.
Watch myself. I bought my own Christmas present. Well, what I have waiting under the tree? A safe. My parents bought me a safe to put the rookie card in. So I had a Michael Jordan rookie card by the time I was 6 because I cut off all the things that every other kid I ever knew. Never knew another kid. There's only one valid excuse. If you're sitting in a wheelchair or something like that and you have no legs, anyone watching this, we are all slapping those people in the wheelchair in the face. It's disrespectful. We are slapping them in the face every time we make an excuse. You can't afford $750 for this? Good, look at one of the options. But you can afford $750. You weren't born with a defect or didn't get in an accident that you actually don't even have legs. If you have legs that have nerve supply, there is no valid excuse.
This is great, but we can take this even further, right? Like even if you're born with some of these defects, there's still a ton you can do, right? A lot of it, it's very rare that you're like completely doomed. And even paralysis, there's cases of like people regaining function, So the question is like, how do you do that? Not that it's easy. So obviously some people have it a lot harder than others. I really believe like you're saying, there's so much you can do, and whenever you're making excuses, you're taking away your own power. There's this guy, I think his Instagram handle is Big Z, and so this guy is born without any legs, but he's like fucking wrestling, he's like a decent wrestler without any fucking legs, and so like he's just gotten so good on his arms. And you can imagine, right? This is the thing, like it's pretty hard to see being born without legs as as an advantage. It's extra weight for him in a lot of ways. By not having that, it allows him to do a lot of things. So it's kind of unfair. My understanding is like he's so light that he has to compete with people that are heavier than him, right? So that's obviously not fair. But he's like doing handstand walks like so fast, right? His pull-ups are like, I've never seen anyone do pull-ups like this guy does pull-ups, right? Because he doesn't have that weight. He's like flying around. He'll like, just seeing like the way he moves is incredible and super inspiring.
That what we're doing here is we're actually handling our problems by confronting them at levels we can handle, and then we're making no excuses. Go through life without an excuse ever. Eventually, you'll have no reason to make it. When you go to full bend, you're not only actively strengthening your muscles, you're passively strengthening your tendons and your ligaments. This explains the modern athlete who looks good, but we see an epidemic of tendon problems, patellotendinitis, ACL tears, for example. So, unless you're training to full bend, you are still vulnerable to patellotendinitis, you're still vulnerable to tearing knee ligaments.
It's not like when you're doing partial range of motion, you're not strengthening the tendons and ligaments, It's also not like if you use a full range of motion that you're not vulnerable to injuries. The way Ido likes to program Nordics, I think I prefer, honestly, rather than using an elevation that you're going to lay down on, having a target on the floor and like touching your nose or your forehead, your chin, maybe even your chest to the target. And as you get stronger, that target will go farther forward, and you can even measure how far that target is. I think that's a much better way to go. It's much more clear and progressive.
And you're slowly going in one way, full circle, using your thigh to help get gravity to overload that ankle.
This is actually quite clever to rotate the hip, so you get the like lateral and medial loading of the ankle.
Of 20 reps on each side of your ankle, using a band under your Achilles, up, and then bringing it.
This is also very clever. The reason it's clever is there's situations where you want a certain exercise, right? You want to challenge a certain part of the body. And so it becomes tricky, like on some of them, how do you get load on these certain parts? Inversion, eversion, how do you really get load on there, like in a progressive way, right? Especially like this in an open chain way. You can do standing, and that's nice because you can do it anywhere, you can be strong there. But like, if you have any really serious ankle injury, you're not going to be able to do that, you know, even if you're like holding on to something. The open chain version, you're going to have a lot more control. You'll be able to do it at a lighter intensity.
I couldn't get out of bed for days. 6 years ago, I followed the typical rest, ice, compression, elevation, modern rehab.
It's not modern rehab.
That the guy who created rest, ice, compression, elevation has since said he was wrong.
Basically, the rest is out. Icing we do a little differently. Again, the focus is on reduction of tissue temperature, but that's the key part. You think about that a little deeper. It's not about actually reducing the temperature of the skin. It's reducing the temperature of the tissue that's injured, right? These are deep tissues generally. Hence, if you want to reduce these deep tissues, remember you've got blood flow going around all the time, keeping things warm. It doesn't actually make sense to put like ice on something because you can only keep it on for so long before, you know, you would start to damage your skin and start to have actual injury from the cold. So what you want to do is you get something quite a bit warmer, so about 15 degrees Celsius, and these are phase change materials. But basically it's just like a gel pack, or the way I like to do it, just put something between you and like the cold thing, such that like you get some cooling, but at the same time you can keep it on for not 10 minutes, but maybe 2 to 3 hours, right? And what you find with that is it's a lot less uncomfortable because it doesn't really like hurt in the same way ice does, but the tissue gets really cold. So that's been shown to help with pain even more than general icing has, I believe. But certainly at a mechanistic level, based on our understanding now, that's the best way to do it. And again, we know icing helps with pain. So even if the secondary injury mechanisms don't pan out like we think it does, it's clear in humans that it helps with pain. So that's the important win. Compression, I believe, is still helpful. Elevation, I believe, is still helpful. The big thing is that we replace rest with early rehab. I actually wrote a review on it. So I can link that paper in the comments if you guys want.
So rather than just addressing the knee, I started addressing the ankle like crazy. Now I have world-class ankle mobility.
He's got world-class use of the word world-class. And where are these classifications, you know?
But there's one last thing I just have to cover with the ankles, and it's your hamstrings, because you're 4 times more likely to injure your hamstring once you've had an ankle injury. And that really goes for anything in your foot, ankle, or...
That's an interesting claim. Now, there's actually citations here. No, it was the chi-squared value that was 4. So here's the actual percentages. I wouldn't make any big conclusions based off of that. And it wasn't 4 times higher.
Goes for it.
And again, this is a study he cited, so I actually read this study.
Now imagine sprinting, right? So let's say one side, because rarely do you just tear both Achilles or sprain both ankles at the same time. So usually it's one side, right? So let's say one side is solid. Now we're adding in the other side, but the ankle can't handle it, so now what has to take the force? Just as we're more likely to injure our knee. So we know the less the ankle can bend.
Again, that study was comparing preceding ankle injury to hamstring injury. Let me read this again to be real clear here. Okay, so they have 367 athletes. They follow them observationally over 17 years. So they're looking at the medical record. So the first injury they had, it couldn't be recurring or they were excluded. The actual numbers, 245 had a hamstring injury, but 27 of those 245 had a hamstring injury and then an ankle injury. Versus 122 had an ankle injury and 23 of the 122 had an ankle injury and then hamstring injury. And so when you look at the actual percentages, athletes with a preceding ankle injury had a 19% chance in this study of developing a following hamstring injury. Versus athletes with a hamstring injury first had an 11% chance of developing a subsequent ankle injury. So it was more likely if you had the ankle injury first that you get a hamstring injury later than if you got the hamstring injury first that you would get the ankle injury later. It's not a fourfold difference, and that it's any difference at all is barely statistically significant here.
If you don't bring the ankle up though, hamstring's more at risk, and just be aware to also be realizing you need to
Again, you can't say that from that one study. And that's not what it said. Not that it's not a good idea to get your ankle strong, but just that, we don't want to be scaring people if we're not sure about something, and especially, something that's barely statistically significant in one study.
I've run my whole life by this concept. It's completely changed my life over the last few years, just by actually going with the concept. What if the closer I get to the truth, the simpler it gets? On that note, you want a really good formula for marriage and not winding up in divorce? Just don't get a divorce. What happens if you don't get a divorce?
He's not a therapist. I can just imagine like a therapist like trying to like work with patients, like that's their advice.
If you're in college right now, get your whatever college athletes, test how much can you pick up off the floor. I don't even care about form, because form ruins studies. They don't check form, so whatever.
On the idea that form ruins studies, I'm going to disagree pretty heavily. So it's one thing if you're going to say that like standards ruin studies, right? If like, for instance, imagine like you're doing a study on deadlifts and the goal is to stand up holding the bar. If you had like a different standard for each person, if you didn't have like a clear thing that everyone has to stand all the way up, and maybe some people can get away with like just lifting it above the knees and you count it the same, like of course that's going to ruin your studies. But everyone knows that. Like I don't think anyone's doing that. So the problem is what I assume he would be talking about is like, this kind of more traditional quality focus of like it only counts if, your form is perfect, right? The thing is, everyone has different proportions. They have different anatomy, they have different limb length ratios, muscle insertions, muscle fiber compositions, muscle volumes, the balances between the different muscles, the skill of the different muscles, like the strength of the muscles in the different positions are all different in every single person. And so when you try to theoretically limit that and just say everyone has to lift it this way, you're forcing some people, by definition, to not use all of their assets, to not lift in their strongest position. They're going to find it, right, when they're training, when they're doing the thing, especially if it's high effort. And so the more you limit that, for instance, let's say you want to do a study on deadlifts, but you're only going to count it if people arch the back a lot, rather than you just lift the bar. Well, some people are going to be a lot weaker in that position. And if you look at the elite powerlifters, so the people that really practice, the people that are professionals in deadlifting, don't really do that. Actually, on average, in one study of elite powerlifters, going up to 80% of maximum lumbar flexion in the deadlift. That's pretty far from arching the back. 80% of the maximum. You're basically putting everyone, or most everyone, depending on what exercise you're doing, in a suboptimal position. So you end up just adding more variables. From a coaching perspective, it introduces the autonomy problem, right? Where you don't give athletes the autonomy to perform the movements in the way that they feel is best for them. So we know autonomy is really important for motivation. And we also know through optimal theory, again, those of you that have seen Intro to Movement Part 3, that autonomy is also really important for performance and learning. It's tricky. Like, I think there has to be a balance when we're coaching, right? We don't want to tell people, hey, this is like the way you have to do things, right? That's the controlling language. We want to have that autonomy supportive language. Hey, if you try it this way, I think it will help you. Oftentimes we're wrong anyway. Show them the option, have them try it, and then let them choose which works best. And maybe if it's really something you feel strongly about, like you really have a lot of evidence like, oh, doing it that way is not going to work, maybe you say, okay, let's just do it this way for now. What I've done with actually a number of clients, there's been some disagreement about some like handstand technique, right? I'm like, okay, no, you should really do it this way. And I'm like, Bren, this is harder for me, you know? And I'm like, no, it's going to be easier. But they're like, it's so much harder for me right now. I'm like, okay. And this is something I feel very strongly about, that this is really helpful for people. So, okay, let's have you try it for a month. And if after a month it still doesn't work better for you, then, you know, we'll switch it back to your way. And after a month, it has worked better for them, right? So, you know, there's ways to work with this. I think one of the things with optimal theory, again, like how many coaches know about optimal theory? How many coaches are using it? They're not 20, 30 years ahead. They're behind. Optimal theory came out in 2016, and I'd never heard anyone talking about it until I took a graduate motor learning course. You know, it's like, what the hell? What are we doing? We're missing out on like something so powerful, right? There's a lot of nuance in like, how do we apply this? What's the best way to apply this that I wish people were talking about, but they don't even know about it in the first place, right? So it's going to be a while until we can really like work with this theory and like use it and like really find the nuance and like how to take it further, right?
So again, I learned this from Charles Poliquin. Take it up with the greats. I'm not one of the greats yet. I'm trying to get there. And this data has made my athletes millions of dollars. So it's really, there's no point in debating someone like me who's actually creating, so I'm making pro athletes millions of dollars with this. Making college scholarships, pro contracts, extending careers.
One thing I'll say for knees over toes guy, you know, he's gotten to a very physically impressive level himself, right? 42-inch vertical, 447 40. Those are elite numbers. And at the end of the day, that's what it's all about, is like, how do we help our athletes get better? And so when you can do that for yourself, especially going from, you know, a much lower point. I don't know where his 40 started from, but that's what it's all about. So everything should culminate towards that. And if he's getting good results for his clients and obviously for himself, that's awesome. And that's a really big point for him.
Don't worry though, progress actually can be really fast. You know why? You can take these babies to failure. Okay, do you know how much gains you can make on a muscle? When you can, go ahead and add up. Go ahead and scroll back through this video. Actually, the worst part of this video is knowing that I'm going to have to scroll back and see how many reps I did and do it with the other one. Because 7 and 8 is being able to go to failure. And what else have I been doing this whole time? Cluster train. I'm able to take a heavy amount of weight. Trust me, 20 pounds for a 180-pound person. Try it before you knock it. See if you can do 20 in a row with about 10% of your weight, then start going up without bending that back leg, right? So cluster training is amazing and very
I'll try it. We'll find out.
and so is pushing a muscle. So the point is that this safely, imagine on a deadlift, right? Imagine saying, okay, once you hit failure, do 30 more reps. You'd have to have spotters, you'd risk a serious back injury, honestly. So with this, look how safe this is. So the point is that this safely, imagine on a deadlift, right? Imagine saying, okay, once you hit failure, do 30 more reps. You'd have to have spotters, you'd risk a serious back injury, honestly. So with this, look how safe this is. So what's dope?
No. No, you wouldn't. Your back would be fine. Look, you can. There's nothing about a heavier load that necessarily makes like a higher injury risk. When we're talking about these sort of forces, right? A deadlift is not that high of a force, right? Your muscles are only going to produce so much force when they're fatigued. There's so much more complexity here, and I don't think there's any evidence to say that, but, you know, prove me wrong. I don't know of any.
Like if you have no protection for your knee, don't expect to, not have knee pain, right? Knee pain is a measurable mathematical fact. Knee pain doesn't have to exist. Shin splints don't have to exist. Myself and thousands of others are now living proof that these are measurable equations. Drop me off a skyscraper, I'm dead, right? Play basketball, I can easily get anyone to knee shins that are physically impossible to hurt from playing basketball.
Okay, he literally just said. Okay, let me rewind.
Play basketball, I can easily get anyone to knee shins that are physically impossible to hurt from playing basketball.
Okay, I can easily get anyone to knees, shins that are physically impossible to hurt from playing basketball. Ooh, it doesn't work that way. One, injury is not just about physical tissue strength, right? Again, like statistically, it's like half of it at best. There's a lot of injury that has nothing to do with tissue damage, and a lot of times people are in a lot of pain. You have them do an MRI, no damage, right? Nothing is wrong at a tissue level. It's not because the MRI isn't good enough, but we have people often in horrible pain with no damage to the tissues. Why? Because pain is an output of the brain. It's not a simple, this tissue is torn and so you feel pain. Tissue could be torn, you don't feel any pain, right? There's a bigger threat somewhere. Or your body decides that's not a threat. And everything can be completely fine. And your body can say, I feel like there's a threat. And so, you're going to feel pain. It's just like fear at a subconscious level. It's like if you're saying that you have to be traumatized by something to be afraid of it. That's not true, right? So if you are totally traumatized by something, you're probably going to be afraid of it. If you've completely torn a tendon or a ligament or broken a bone, you're probably going to be in pain. Not always, right? Maybe you've just got your left side eaten by the shark. You're not going to feel pain and probably until you're on the beach. And it's not just because adrenaline magically blocks all pain. Yeah, I was hoping he wouldn't say something like this, Because look, the exercise is good. It's going to prevent injury. Doing the knees over toes training is good. It's going to prevent more injury because you do have to be prepared for these weird angles and different things, right? We can't just be like, this position causes more load on, whatever tendon, so, we should all avoid it forever, right? Guess what happens? You avoid it and then you're weak there and you get injured, right? So this is really good stuff that we should be doing. I like the idea of motivating people to do this stuff. But that was a flat out lie. That's not true. You cannot make it physically impossible for someone to get injured, let alone easily. Most injury reduction programs reduce injury risk by about 50%, right? That's a pretty good number. And if knees over toes guy wants to do a study and show that he can reduce injury risk by 100%, say he cuts it in half, that's fantastic. That is a world away from making it physically impossible to be injured. And again, from easily doing it, right? But yeah, let's move on. It's good to motivate people to exercise and get stronger and do these things. These are good interventions he's pushing for. I like the idea of motivating people, but we can't be just lying to them, right? This isn't not cool. Oh, hey there. Handsome mystery sponsor here. The wait is over. I finally reopened my online coaching program. So if you want to work with me and my team, or if you just want to support this channel, check out our channel memberships to sign up directly or fill out a form on our website. We're back. It's day 3. And we're going to keep churning through these videos. I'm still upset from the making it physically impossible to get injured comment yesterday. But we're gonna keep churning through these and see if he can redeem himself.
But it's the full knee bend that actually strengthens and develops your ligaments. So
you don't have to go to full range of motion, and certainly not full knee flexion to strengthen your ligaments. Anything like ligaments, tendons, muscles, bones, your whole body adapts to any stimulus that will challenge it, right? And so those tissues in particular, they respond mostly to load. So they don't have to be, in a full flexion or full extension for them to see load. And when they see that load, they'll adapt and get stronger if it's a significant challenge. Again, you guys can tell today I'm more pissed off. After the injury comment, I'm a little angry now, so forgive me, but no more Mr. Nice Guy.
Overwhelming number one reason people give up on this is weak ligaments. That's because the Nordic work.
No, they don't. First of all, the reason most people give up on any exercise is just motivation. They stop doing it, right? To ignore that is ridiculous. And second of all, Nordics put a ton of load on the hamstring. Yeah, they can load the ACL. Yes, the ACL connects there. In the Nordics, we're putting tremendous load on the hamstring, particularly the hamstring tendons, right? The distal ones that you feel at the bottom of the knee. Yeah, and the clients I've had that have done ACL rehab after surgery, I don't remember them having any trouble doing Nordics. As far as pain, right? Like the strength is a different issue, but it wasn't like that was challenging the ACL for them.
You go down a little bit more,
He is just slamming his knees into the floor here. I'm sure it helps him to do them a little cleaner. But it's important to notice details like that, because there are all sorts of exercises where if you don't notice those details and then you try to do it clean and you just find it's so hard, and you're having so much trouble, and then you go back and you realize, oh well, he actually wasn't even doing it like this anyway. He's slamming his knees into the floor to start the rep. Oh, and so that's not a big deal on the kind of surface he's got here. This is like basically a Nordic machine, which is great. But, imagine you're doing this on concrete, right? Like those sort of forces become what's actually a big deal, right? You do 5 reps like that on concrete, your kneecaps are going to be like in some serious pain,
More. A little bit. More.
The way we can avoid all of this trouble with slamming the knees into the floor on all these reps, get rid of all the platforms, keep your knees on the floor, and just have a target at a certain distance, right? A certain distance from your knees. Touch your nose or forehead to that target. Find the distance that you can do under control for whatever reps you want to do, and you'll be good. You won't need to just slam your knees into the floor.
I have no secrets. I went from 10 years of chronic knee pain.
That's how you do an intro. I should do something like that.
In a wrestling sport, have to pick up another human being like this. I drove this with Jeff watching me to 100% of my body weight, wrist below toes, and I was fine, okay? Don't be offended.
That's a funny cut. That's what I'm trying to...
My body weight, wrist below toes, and I was fine, okay?
I wonder what he cut out there. Probably just some rambling. A lot of us that are taking the more modern and sort of pain science approach to things and really looking at the evidence for, the loaded lumbar flexion argument, this argument that, you should never round your back under load, we don't think it's a big deal. The evidence for it being risky is like dubious at best, and it originated from like a study in like a ex vivo pig spine. It has very limited relevance to a living human being that adapts to things. Yeah, so, I've taken my Jefferson curl up quite a bit as well. It is a good thing to work on, and also people go far above body weight. If you look at the Chinese Olympic weightlifters, a lot of them do it pretty much as just a deadlift variation, and they're doing some of them double body weight, maybe even more, So you can definitely get this way up there. And then you could also consider strongmen, the way they do the Atlas stone, you could consider that a rounded back deadlift. And they do that. They do it with probably at least 3, maybe 400. Those guys also weigh 400 pounds, so it's not much more than body weight.
Probably not going to do any more of these after this video, so I might as well bang out a few reps.
Nice.
Think how many back injuries, how many of them happen on a perfect line? No, it's often going to get something here or making a move this way. Guy makes a crosser. So you go, as soon as you go outside of that forward range, boom.
I swear, like, there's so much similarity here. I swear he's watched probably a bunch of Ito's videos as well. I don't think this is all from... Super impressive.
It seems to be the miracle of preventing injury is when they've used these crazy expensive machines to analyze the length of the muscle, not the flexibility, the length. So at this stage, I don't even stretch. I just get strong, but I get strong in every nook and cranny, and I get strong in the stretch position.
One of the things I was reading some of the research yesterday. There is some good research on using strength training to build range of motion, and the majority of it shows there's no difference between stretching or strength training for the increase in range of motion. And so the way a lot of stretching works mechanistically is just increasing the tolerance your muscles and tendons to being at longer lengths. Okay, consider it's COVID era, so guess what I have handy is a mask. Consider you've got a rubber band here, right? Say this is a muscle and tendon, right? And these are the two ends, the origin and insertion, and where they attach to the bone, right? Stretching does, basically, at least static stretching, is it's not going to actually increase the length of this tissue. But as you put it under stretch, your body is basically going to say, at a certain point, I'm not going to let you go any further. It's not because the tissue doesn't go further. It's just there's a certain point where your body and your brain, your central nervous system just cuts you off and says, that's enough. As we stretch, both in the immediate term, like as you're doing it, over the weeks of a flexibility program, your body will get more comfortable and tolerate you pulling that same tissue farther and farther. And so we often see very dramatic increases in flexibility with stretching, but we haven't actually, you do MRI or ultrasound or whatever, and you're going to see how long the tissue actually is, it hasn't changed. And it's generally very hard to change the physiological length of the tissue. When you consider it that way, it makes a lot more sense to do strength training than stretching normally, because you're building strength, right? Like that itself is very valuable. A lot of stretching routines and protocols aren't going to build any strength. So you're really weak and, you have the range of motion, but you can't do much with it, right? Versus we know strength training can increase range of motion, and we also know it does remodel the tissues. It's still hard to remodel tissues. A lot of adaptations to strength training are at a neuromuscular level or at a central nervous system level, but some of them are at a physiological tissue level as well. It has been shown that we can change the length of the tissues with stretching, but it has to be fairly dramatic. There's a number from Quinn Henoch of basically 20 minutes per muscle group per week to actually remodel the physical tissues through stretching. And that's an enormous amount. It doesn't sound like a lot. 20 minutes per muscle group per day, right? Now imagine you're going to do all your muscle groups. So you'd be spending, 10 hours a day stretching. It's absurd, right? Now, granted, the way I like to teach flexibility for a lot of people, if you guys have seen my static stretching routine, it's a static stretching routine. Now, there's isometrics built into it, but a lot of it is static. Some of it is static passive. Some of you that see my videos, maybe you're thinking like, oh, what are you saying now? You're saying this is stupid? No, there's some nuance with it. A lot of people don't have a lot of time. They're not going to allocate a lot of time to do mobility strength training work every day, right? And static passive stretching has been shown to have the fastest and largest effect on range of motion, right? There's this meta review that I talked about before. The thing with this static work, especially the way I designed it, is it's very quick. It's simple, it's quick, easy to do, right? And very effective. So I really like that for people that don't have a lot of time to allocate to flexibility. And that's the other thing. Is it that important, right? In an overall movement scope, is your flexibility that important? Not really. Just like strength, it's not going to help you in that many things. I think there's a YouTube series somewhere of a bodybuilder that tries a whole bunch of different sports. How helpful is all the muscle he's built? If anything, it holds him back in a lot of ways, right? Flexibility is the same. It doesn't come with the same trade-off of weight, but there's a point where it becomes less useful. The other thing with the dynamic sort of strength training work is it ends up taking a lot more time and effort per sort of exercise you're doing, right? Yeah, like the way he's doing these leg raises here, you're like probably going to need to do multiple sets on each side. The leg raises and then the natural leg extensions and then, all this other stuff. Ito uses the diagonal stretch for the hip flexors more. You've got to do multiple sets on each side. They're each challenging, 10 reps, 10-second hold at the end. And especially some of them where balance is involved and then you're not challenging the range of motion so much. So for people that are really missing the range of motion, just most people, and they don't have a lot of time, which is also most people, I gravitate towards that static, quick stretching routine. Granted, there are isometrics in there, but that's the way I gravitate towards for most people. But I will make another routine for you guys where we'll do a little more dynamic stuff like this.
The secret to bulletproofing is being strong from one side to the other, as in the split squat, and from one side of each joint to the other side, as in your squat, compared to your Nordic. How hard you can put force.
So his secret to making injuries physically impossible in basketball is something that has been shown to not work very well. Great.
Noise is not me, well, bad knees, but I am going to share with you how I improved my own knee noise and many others.
He just spits all the carrots out on the floor.
How we can now progress on that without that nasty noise. It's as simple as elevating, because not a single study in history shows that more pain-free ability is a bad thing, and we also know that restoring full knee bend is...
Yeah, my entire system of rehab is all entirely based on pain-free ability. Taking that concept and really going, yeah, I totally agree.
I'm also known as Mama Knees Over Toes. I'm very proud of that. I head up the customer service team.
This is so wonderful. This is great.
So this is on today's workout. I'm driving across the country.
Okay, this is going to be really weird. I don't know why he doesn't know this. There's a way to breathe that is helpful for any sort of movement under load, right? Especially when that load travels through the torso. It's called the Valsalva maneuver. Basically, you're going to suck in some air and pressurize your torso, right? And you're going to try to either just hold that breath and brace like someone was going to punch you, or what you see in a lot of Olympic weightlifting especially, is people will do that, but they'll press with so much force. Basically what's happening is everything is compressing all of that kind of space in your abdominal cavity. And so by creating more pressure there, your torso better transmits force through the hips and legs, through the torso to the shoulders to the bar, or to whatever, to the rest of the body, right? And that's really helpful anytime we've got all that load there. So the other thing you'll see in Olympic weightlifting, the way they tend to do it is same sort of thing, but they're creating so much pressure that some of the air escapes, and it's like, you know, there's like, you know, like these sort of noises where they, like, they sound really funny. What I see often with like some people that aren't as experienced with it is like these sort of like high effort people tend to do this, where there's like they'll breathe like, and this sort of breathing isn't optimal for creating that pressure, right? You're losing that pressure. If it's not that hard, don't worry about it. You don't need to do it. There's all sorts of instances. The Olympic weightlifters, they've got 500 pounds on bar, they're squatting, and they look like they're taking a walk in the park.
Remember, this is 200 kilos again.
They're squatting this thing up and down, easy peasy. They breathe whatever they want. But when it gets hard, you'll need to create this pressure if you want to lift well. Exert the maximum force that you're capable of, or do the most reps. Again, it changes depending on the number of reps you're doing per set. So if you're doing 1 or maybe even 2, you can pretty much hold your breath the whole time, depending on the exercise. The more reps you do, the more you'll need to breathe. It becomes a balance between you breathe through the easier part. So for instance, on a squat, the easiest parts are basically near the top. That top quarter on the way up and also the way down, those are the easiest. So you want to brace through the hardest part, which is basically coming out of the bottom, and especially when you come out of the hole, when your hips are basically level with your knees. That's where you'll need the pressure the most. And that's where you want to have a full breath of air and fully pressurized for that. But once you get through that, then you can breathe again, you relax. As you start getting into the hard parts again, big breath, pressurize again, get through that hard part, breathe again, breathe, go back, pressurize, and repeat. And again, the more reps you're doing, the less percent of your maximum load you're doing, the less you actually need to brace, and the more time you'll need to breathe. So there's a balance here. But listen to the way he's breathing here. You see that? Like on the way up, he just exhaled right before the hardest part. That's not what you want to do. It'll be easier. Hold that breath. If it's that hard, have the air already when you're there. Even if it's a long pause, it's probably not going to be that hard. Take that breath, pressurize, keep the pressure as you come up, even if some of it escapes just because you pressurize it so much. Rather than, if you exhale, you're losing that air, you don't have as much to pressurize, right? So this is not that heavy for him. He's just demoing the exercise, right? So it's not a big deal. But I have seen this multiple times now, and I'm surprised I'm seeing it from a coach of this level. Especially in yoga, people are like pretty silly about the breath, I think, a lot of times. And they're like, oh, you should always breathe through your nose when you're exercising and like when you're lifting. No, like there are different ways to breathe depending on what you're doing that are going to be optimal, right? For lifting something where you're going to need that intra-abdominal pressure, you're going to have force traveling through the torso. You want to create that Valsalva technique and that intra-abdominal pressure to help transfer force. And the The net outcome of that is you'll finish the reps easier and faster.
The average person needs to start elevated about a foot because those back hip flexors are too tight, while also elevating the front heel with a plate or a doorstop because the ankle's too tight, while also having a PVC pipe in the offhand to assist balance and strength.
I almost want to create a term for this. Maybe we can call it like the quality fallacy or like the form fallacy. There's this idea that if you do an exercise in a different way, like that an exercise like this, say, has to be done in a certain way for it to work. And if you screw it up, if you do things differently, it's a mistake, and then people will go further and say, that's going to cause injury and pain, and if it doesn't, even if it feels fine right now, later you're going to pay for it, right? That's always the catch-all excuse. It's like, oh, it could feel fine now, but you'll pay for it later. But there's no evidence to ever claim that. But you also can't disprove that, right? Because say it's been a year and you've been doing it and you've been doing well, maybe you've been improving, and maybe someone will say, in 5 years, it'll, then you'll pay for it. And 5 years go by, you're doing great. They say, in 10 years, you'll pay for it. Or maybe 5 years go by, you get one injury, in your right shoulder, and someone's like, that's because you're doing the split squat wrong, it's silly. It's not about just like perfection of the form. It's not going to save you here. And pain isn't even something to be like so afraid of, right? It's about working with the discomfort and progressively finding the ways that are going to reduce it, or finding ways around it so you can just avoid it overall. And that may mean you do things differently than he's showing, right? And that's not a mistake. The only mistakes are really going to be if you do it in a way that's going to make it more painful, that are going to make your knees more sensitive or weaker. And granted, there will be ways which are going to, that you do the movement that are going to demand more or less out of certain structures. And so we might decide, okay, we want to force you to do it this way to put more demand on this structure rather than this structure. But it's not a fundamental right versus wrong, this way you'll be good and this way you'll run into problems. It's much more, you did it this way and that creates this demand, but we want to use this exercise to create this demand on those structures, and so we're going to change it and modify it in this way. For example, right, the heel lift thing. So you might decide you could do with the heel up or with the heel down, and he's even showed with the heel up here. He's showing with the heel supported, and basically letting that heel elevate is going to reduce the demand on the ankle and the Achilles. But because of that, if you have a limitation in the ankle, especially if you have a limitation in the ankle, it will allow you to put more demand and more range of motion into the knee and maybe the other hip flexor, maybe the loaded leg. So again, it's not right or wrong. It's where do you want to put the demand right now, right? The way it's being presented as okay, here's the exercise, and you guys are going to do it, half of you are going to do it wrong, and you're going to need my form corrections to help you. If you feel pain, it's because you did it wrong. You're going to need my form corrections to help you. That's not the way it is. And this is something I think he would agree with, and we can have, a really nice discussion on. You want to shift the locus of control to your students and clients, right? They do it, they feel pain. Do you want them to feel the autonomy and power and control to be able to modify it and feel confident about modifying themselves? Or do you want them to have to rely on you? Obviously, one is a better business decision, but is that what it's really about? No. It's about what is going to help these people the most. Again, this isn't like a Ben Patrick knees over toes guy thing. This is very general. This is something from a lot of trainers, especially those associated with Paul Quinn, often those associated with Ito and Ito himself, and just people from totally separate worlds of fitness, right? A lot of people will say this sort of stuff because this is a sort of myth that helps people make money, right? I couldn't tell you guys, how many people come to me and they're like, am I doing this exercise right? Blah, blah, blah. And how easy it would be to just 10x my income if I were to just try to tell people that I know the one way to do things, and you know, like that they're doing things wrong and they're gonna lead to injury. As it is right now, people are coming to me saying that stuff, and I have to like kind of fight back and like try to guide them towards, you know, finding their own way and finding their own confidence in doing these exercises and modifying the exercise for themselves. Rather than like, oh, you know, you got injured because you did it wrong. I didn't personally coach you, so you need to come, you know, pay for sessions with me, or, you know, get my feedback, and you need, because I'm the one that knows how to do this, not you.
That is intense pressure. I can handle pressure now. But there's no way anyone in the world over the last 10 years, there's no way anyone has spent more time handling pressure from the ground up safely. So I stopped counting at 100 miles. We're talking over, you know, years period.
He's accumulated 100 miles of just sled work. He's working really hard. No one works harder than him. Doesn't have any entertainment. But then he also only trains 30 minutes a day. I'm it's like, how are all these things true at the same time?
With your own form coach and questions answered under 7 days a week. It's a full body program, but it likely has the most knee success stories ever.
All right, we're done. Now, it's time to conclude this video with some ratings. Passion. This freaking guy has so much passion for fitness and helping you get your knees stronger, and it's easily one of his greatest qualities. I'm not sure how nobody is working harder than him, and yet he only works out 30 minutes a day, but easy 5 out of 5 here. I also love how he gets his mom and his wife involved in his videos. There's nothing stronger than family.
I got family.
Marketing. 10 out of 5. Homeboy is potentially writing the next chapter in fitness marketing strategy. I don't like the idea of boiling down a person to a single aspect like the knees over toes guy, but it certainly seems to be very effective. His rehab prescriptions are also very simple. Not great if you're looking for a comprehensive protocol, but they're undeniably great for a mass market appeal. However, I often worry that many of Ben's protocols are simple to a fault and lacking the nuance that most viewers need in order to implement them successfully and avoid setbacks. In some areas, I'm sure things just got skipped over for the sake of clarity, simplicity, and time. But in others, I suspect Ben didn't give a nuanced explanation because he himself doesn't have a nuanced understanding. He's more of the passion guy. He knows just enough of the science that he can use it to get you fired up for training, but not enough to align with modern ideas on pain and injury. Movement optimism. Ben seems generally very optimistic that you can always make your body stronger and heal your knees, which is great. Still, it seems that the way his coaching is structured insists on you doing each exercise in the one correct way that he shows you, which is odd for someone who believes, like I do, in the power of strengthening your body in what are conventionally considered incorrect positions, such as knees over toes. This only one correct way approach is called controlling language in the motor learning literature, and has been shown repeatedly to slow learning, reduce motivation and performance by reducing autonomy. 4 out of 5 stars. Leading from the front. This is one of the reasons I was so drawn to making a video about Ben, and one of the aspects I respect about him the most. The healthcare industry is currently filled with people who struggle with obesity and generally taking their own advice, so I believe it's even more important to have people like Ben leading from the front and showing how it can be done by being the example. 5 out of 5 stars. BSometer. Ben seems to reference a lot of science, but when I fact-checked him, it was rare that he was interpreting the studies properly. He never once mentioned pain science or anything that would really come from a good understanding of pain science, and I consider this more than a little disturbing, given that he's one of the largest figures in the injury rehab fitness space. Pain science is an entire field whose tenets should be foundational for anyone who deals with pain, let alone anyone who works with pain and injury professionally. I think many of the studies he talks about are far too weak to make the claims he's making. For instance, his beliefs about muscular imbalances and their association with mobility and injury. Still, it's not like he's recommending foam rolling and essential oils. But he did say he can easily make it physically impossible for anyone to get injured playing basketball, which automatically adds 1 to our BSometer for a score of 2.5 out of 5 emojis. Exercise design. 5 stars means that not only is everything well designed, it's based on the most modern scientific paradigms, and innovative in multiple areas. Knees over toes guy has definitely innovated in a number of ways, mainly by successfully marketing the idea of training knees over toes and misalignment. But I also really like how he's pushed the backwards walking, reverse sled pushes, front foot highly elevated split squat, and the configurations of bands he uses to load inversion and eversion in his ankle injury protocol. Overall, I think the exercises he's programmed are good, but I think a lot of the mechanistic theories supporting his practices, namely targeting the VMO and muscular imbalance, are BS as far as bulletproofing goes. And I can't give 5 stars to a blurry foundation. For exercise design, Ben gets an extremely respectable 4.5 out of 5 stars. Overall, Ben Patrick, aka the knees over toes guy, is one of the most successful people in the fitness space, and is perhaps currently the most successful figure in the rehab for athletes niche. His profile means I feel no qualms about giving you guys my brutally honest review. Ben seems to be lacking a bit of wisdom, and I wouldn't take his unsolicited marriage advice, even with an ocean of salt, but overall, he's a smart guy and seems very hardworking, passionate, and athletic. He's leading from the front, which is hard, and seems to be genuinely doing his absolute best to help people around the world, and I have a huge amount of respect for that. That said, I can't get away from his lack of attention to, or even worse, awareness of, pain science. If you're injured, pain is always going to be the major concern. It's unavoidable. And if you don't understand how pain works, what the hell are you doing? Ben is good at what he does, but he's not a magician. He can't guarantee that you won't get injured, and there are definitely times where he sways towards that kind of absolutist guru mode that is rife in the YouTube health and fitness space. This differs from my personal approach, which is to make yourself more resilient to injury and anti-fragile by learning how to work with pain and rehab injuries intelligently when they do occur. Different strokes, maybe, but this is probably the single biggest critique I have of his work. Finally, this could be seen as unfair, but as a movement teacher, I believe Ben's focus on just training the physical attributes of the body, specifically strength, speed, mobility, and resilience, is myopic. It leads you to the same problem you get with gymnastic strength training. Eventually, you get athletes with all the physical attributes and no idea how to use them outside of or even within their sport. The skill with which you use your physical attributes is far more important than the attributes themselves. Overall, on an extremely harsh scale, and I'm talking people on Twitter critiquing your life choices level harsh, Knees Over Toes Guy gets a respectable score of 3.5 out of 5 stars. If you want to learn everything you need to know about movement, click here. Or if you want to see my own approach to injuries that's based on a comprehensive understanding of pain science, click here. Let me know what you want to see next, and subscribe.